This time I'd like to call to order the Monday, January 15th, January 5th meeting of 2015 to order of the Currituck County Board of Commissioners. This time we have for the invocation and pledge of allegiance, Reverend Walter Gallup, who is a retired Air Force chaplain. Please stand.
A prayer for the new year. Let us pray. Our Father in heaven, we ask you to be with us as we begin a new year. Preserve in our hearts and mind a large measure of the Christmas spirit during this year. Even after we have taken down the Christmas trees and laid away all the decorations, we still need the beauty, the dreams, and the joy to walk with us into this new year. As we walk across another year's boundary, facing the clamor of commerce and government, the suffering and pains of our neighbors, we still need a guiding star and a heavenly vision and a remembrance that a holy child is born. As our paths lead away from the Christmas season and level out amid the stern realities of daily life, grant that the vision of the angels and their song, Peace on Earth, shall still inspire us, and their heavenly assurance lead us away from drabness and dullness of mere living. Keep our lives reverent this year, that we may serve you as we serve our community and we serve our nation. Hear our prayer, O Lord. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Mr. Gallup, thank you, and the best for the new year.
Thank you.
This time we need to approve the agenda, but before we do, I need to add for the Sheriff's Department surplus property of a Mossberg 600 AT shotgun needs to be added to the consent agenda under surplus property.
Mr. Chairman, I believe we're also going to remove letter B under public hearings.
Yes, and we're going to continue item B under public hearings.
So move.
I have a motion for approval. Have a second?
Second.
All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We'll start out with public comment. Ask that during your public comments you state your name and address for the record, and that Mr. McCree will be working the time instrument. Each person will be given 3 minutes. And with that, we'll start with Peter Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good evening, Board of Commissioners. Hope you all had an excellent holiday and are enjoying a good 2015 Happy New Year. Thank you for the time to speak with you today. I'm here to talk a little bit about some report cards that the state issues out to each of the county governments each year on their economic well-being. This is called the county tier designations. That's done by the State Department of Commerce's Labor and Economic Analysis Division. It's basically, as I mentioned, a report card of the economic and fiscal health of each county within the state. We have 100 counties, and there are different tiers that counties are placed in based on these different economic factors. The 4 factors that tiers are judged on are average unemployment rate, median household income, percentage growth in population, and adjusted property tax base per capita. That's the amount of tax base that we have per people that we have within the county. And I'm proud to announce that the Currituck County has retained its Tier 2 status. There are 3 tiers, one being the most well-off counties within the state, number 2 being the middle counties, and number 3 being the least well-off counties. And typically you'll find those in rural areas. Currituck County is a Tier 2, but only for one factor, because we have less than 50,000 people. I'm going to read through how we measured on these rankings, and I think you'll find the results pretty impressive and a pretty good indication of how government's being run here in Currituck County. As far as average unemployment rate, Currituck County ranks 6 out of 100 counties. Our average unemployment rate is going to be probably around 5% this year. That has stepped down from 7% in 2011, 6.9% the year thereafter, 6% the year after that. So we're steadily getting back to a consistently low unemployment rate. Again, we're ranking 6th out of 100 counties in the state. Our median household income ranks 5th of 100 counties in the state. Our percentage growth in population is a little under 4%. That ranks us 20th of the 100 counties in the state of North Carolina. Our adjusted property tax base per capita, and this would be expected, we are ranked number 2 in the state next to Dare County. We average almost $300,000 of tax value per resident in Currituck County. That's a pretty impressive number. All of this leads to an overall distress ranking of number 2. So we are the number 2 county in the state next to Chatham County as far as economic well-being and financial strength. And I think that's something that all of our residents can be very proud of, certainly the Board of Commissioners and county staff, in making sure that we're running government efficiently and that we're raising and keeping a good community and a high quality of life. One last statistic that I didn't include there, we have the 3rd lowest poverty rate of any county in the state, next to Camden and I think possibly another one. So all these indicators are fantastic. Little Currituck County, 25,000 people, we're basically number 2 in the state as far as economic well-being, and I thought I'd bring that to your attention. That was released before I had an opportunity last year, before everybody left, so certainly wanted to start the year off with some good news. And then I'll turn it locally. A few other indicators that we track locally are transfer tax collections, our revenues basically is what I'm going to discuss here, occupancy tax revenues, and our gross sales tax and taxes collected from those sales have all increased over 5% in each of the last 3 fiscal years. So those indicators are all moving in a proper direction, in a positive direction. Our permits issued, our permit values have all increased the same. We had a slight dip in actual permits issued this year compared to the last few, but all of those indicators, again, are increasing in a positive trajectory. In the last 3 years, there's been over $300 million of investment in Currituck County in residential and commercial buildings. That's a pretty impressive number to look at, especially considering the recession that we came out of. I'm certainly not going to sit here and take credit. You know, economic development's a team sport, and there's a lot of things that come into it and a lot of decisions that are made at this table and in this room by y'all that help guide all that. But I thought it was important to talk about these issues, let y'all know that we are moving in the right direction with a lot of our economic and fiscal indicators. A lot of other communities are looking somewhat enviously about where we stand as a community. So I thought it was important to start the year off with some good news and share that with y'all. And certainly I'll take any questions if you have them.
Want to have any questions?
I do.
Yes, sir.
The 4th indicator you were talking about. the tax.
Yes.
Can you explain that a little bit? I mean, I heard what you said.
Yes.
And I probably understand, but I don't know that everyone in the audience would understand what you say. I don't understand fully myself. So.
Certainly. That statistic is the amount of tax base that is in Currituck County per population. So for each person in Currituck County, there is almost $300,000 of taxable building or asset on the ground. And that is, I think, the highest is around 415,000. That's Dare County. And again, that's a function of having a lot of beach homes that are of high value and having smaller population. But it's also, again, a testament to the revenue generation that this county brings to its residents and also really to the state. I think we return more dollars in tax revenue that we take in here in Currituck County to the state of North Carolina.
Good. I got it. Thank you.
Yes.
All right, any other questions or comments? Peter, keep up the good work.
Thank you very much.
Next is Miss Mary Etheridge.
Good evening. My name is Mary Etheridge, and I live at 846 Shawborough Road in Shawborough. My family and I have been involved in litigation with the county since December 2011. At the November the 17th, 2014 meeting, Chairman O'Neill asked me what it is I wanted from the county. Mr. O'Neill, it's very simple what I want and why I continue to speak. I want the citizens of Currituck County to see how the office of the county commissioner can be used against the citizen, how the office can be used to try and benefit or punish a law-abiding citizen, and how the office can cause a financial hardship on a citizen who did absolutely nothing wrong. The latest example of how my family is treated differently was your concern over the Welcome Center for the ferry located near the courthouse. You wanted letters written to change the design of the Welcome Center so it would be in more consistency with the historical courthouse area. Well, our family presented the commissioners with a letter written from the North Carolina Department of Cultural Resources asking you not to approve a junkyard in our neighborhood. They asked you to protect the historical area surrounding the twin houses because it's one of the few homes in the county on the National Register of Historical Homes. Mr. O'Neill, what do I want? I want closure. I don't know if the commissioners just got pulled into one county commissioner trying to benefit from land he owned and his desire to hurt my family. I don't know what each of the commissioners was thinking when the junkyard was approved. All I know is I deserve to be treated fairly, and no other citizen should have to endure the hardship that my family has endured. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Barbara Snowden?
Good evening. My name is Barbara Snowden, and I live at 154 Courthouse Road. I have three things I'd like to bring before you tonight. The first thing is I'd like to thank you, the county manager, the commissioners, for getting a meeting together with DOT about the Welcome Center. We had not heard anything from DOT about the design except the picture we had seen, and so it was a very good, informal, informational meeting, and I appreciate y'all doing that for us. The second thing is I need for you to keep the Welcome Center in the forefront because it's something that people in Currituck County are very concerned about. I don't go out too terribly much in this cold weather, but when I do go out, I get stopped at the food line or I get stopped at the post office by people that I don't even know, and they ask me about where the Welcome Center is and is there a chance that we can make some changes in the design. And I really, to be honest, don't know what to tell them. I told them that y'all had written a letter, we had met with them, and we're hoping to try to do something. The third thing has an actual concern with the design of the Welcome Center. The architect at our meeting said it was a one-story building, and the two wings are one story. And then he said, we made the height of the building 2 feet below the building to behind the building. The building behind that building will be our house. And I'm sorry that the architect did not realize it, but my house is a 2-story house with a full attic. And my rooms, the downstairs and the upstairs, are 12 feet high. And if he made that building, the center section of that building, only 2 feet below my house, then therefore that is a very big, tall center section. And that is the part that I hope the architect can make some changes to in a way that will reduce the height of that building and make it fit in more with the community of Currituck. As I said at the very first thing, I appreciate y'all working with me on this and the concern that the commissioners have expressed about accepting what we're concerned about. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Barber. Mr. Scanlon, I asked earlier today for the manager to get an update since we've had that meeting as to what the status was, and I think he got an email back today.
I got a response late this afternoon, which I forwarded to the commissioners. NCDOT, that the gentleman that we were working with on this project is to some degree apologetic based on the holidays. There was not an opportunity for the architect and the appropriate NCDOT staff to get together. I think they've got something scheduled for this week, and we should be hearing something shortly. But as of right now, he does not have anything to report back to us.
And I will say that they were apologetic about the way that it came about, and they explained how this went through a different process than it's done in the past, and I think they got the message that it should be, more of a public vetting next time. But they did say they'd take it back and they'd look to see what they could do to change it seems to be one section as the main concern, the support beams in the front of the building. So they did say they would try to look at that.
And I did include in the email the DOT rep sent the PowerPoint presentation that he used in our meeting. In that is the elevation, so you can see. This will be the first time you've probably had an opportunity to actually see the building, so you can see what the citizens' concern is. But there is a center section that is higher than the rest of the building is where the objection is, but you have that elevation in that email.
That's the portion that Ms. Snowden was addressing right there.
Well, one of the things that kind of give me some concern in the letter that at some point in time made it sound like we had been involved in the process, and unbeknownst to me, if we have, then I think that after the conversation with you, I'd like for you just to let the public know what involvement we did have.
They brought a site plan that went through our technical review committee. They did not bring elevations. So the staff did see the site. We approved the site plan. But again, the building itself was not part of that submittal and was not part of that review. So the staff did not comment on or see the building.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Mr. Josh Bass.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Josh Bass and live at 103 Egret Cove in Moyock. I come before you this evening as a member of the Currituck Historical Society. Again, I would like to second Ms. Snowden's thanking of the county for the support on the Ferry Welcome Center and for the county getting that meeting together with the Historical Society and the Ferry Division and DOT. We certainly appreciate that. I was a little surprised to read the headline in the Daily Advance that this had kind of come out of the blue, that the design was something new that hadn't been talked about. So I went back and kind of looked at my phone log and emails. I made a phone call to Representative Steinberg in April of this year to start asking some questions when we knew this building was coming about. He directed me to Mr. Goodwin, who had just been named head of the Ferry Division. I called Mr. Goodwin, I believe, 2 or 3 days after he was named head of the Ferry Division, which he was named on April the 8th, and talked to him about it. He assured me that we would be able to have some input on design, which up until the meeting that happened on December the 19th, we had not seen design or had a chance to have input on it. I emailed Mr. Malcolm Fearing, the DOT rep for this district, on October 16th and received a reply from him on October the 17th. And again, we met with DOT on December the 19th. So I was a little surprised to hear that this was something new that people hadn't heard about in the Ferry Division or DOT. Certainly, I think the commissioners, y'all had heard about it from us. And while I agree with you, Mr. Chairman, I think they were very apologetic. I think what we were asking for in the design seemed simpler than what they had proposed. We also talked some about the siding and whether the siding fit with the historic character of the village here around the courthouse. And both the siding and that 18-story front porch really were the two issues that we brought about in that meeting. And we kept being told in that meeting over and over again that those were not simple changes, that there were a few simple things they could do. And to me, siding at this stage of the game seems like a relatively simple change that the Historical Society is requesting, or members of the Historical Society are requesting. So I was kind of surprised in that meeting to get such resistance from them since we'd been talking to them since April. But certainly we appreciate the county's support on this. Y'all have done a very good job, I think, in helping the Historical Society with it. So we appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Rhonda Morris.
Good evening. I'm Rhonda Morris. I live at 4379 Currituck Highway. I lived as a child right here in this little village of Currituck, and I am new to this. It's kind of news to me about not about the Welcome Center, but as far as having any input at all in that. I'm sorry I missed the meeting on the 19th. I had another meeting, but the thought of what we have to live with for probably the rest of our lives, we really want to be clear on what it is that we're going to have to live with. And we want it to be something that fits. I certainly want it to be something that fits in with this community. And what I saw first off in that original plan, if that's still the same, that center section that you're talking about is the same as what I saw in the beginning, that does not fit. That just does not fit. It looks like something that came from somewhere else and was planted here. And what would fit, I don't know. Maybe something that's all one level, or just something that doesn't have steel beams in the middle and glass to eternity, whatever. But I think it just needs to be revisited so that it fits in more with the area. And that's just my opinion. That's
Okay. Let me start out with the layout of the collection system. Basically, we have a force main that runs from the state line down to Moyock Commons, down by the food line area. You can see the area that has our services highlighted in brown. We do have a developer agreement with Lakeview, which is on the southern end, to extend the force main on down to the area of Eagle Creek entrance. You can also see I highlighted on here the Moyock Crossing. That's a potential development that's coming up. It also serves the Welcome Center, Assisted Living, Newtown area. You can see the wastewater treatment plants on the left side of the screen. The wastewater plant site is a rectangular shape. It's not very, you can't see it very good on this drawing, but you can see the layout of potential phases. Right now, we're only occupying 100,000 gallons per day out of a potential 600,000 gallon per day site. This was funded by a construction loan. The force main was funded through mostly grants and some tap fees. The tap fees from the Welcome Center and Assisted Living helped with that on top of an economic development grant. All right, we'll jump into capacity. The Moyock Commons wastewater plant is rated at 99,000 gallons per day. The Moyock Commons plant, Moyock Commons has a treatment plant that we acquired. It's 40,000 gallons per day, so our total capacity is 139,000 gallons per day. Now, we have our current users are, I'm going to round these numbers. We're at 47,000 gallons per day of capacity, of state permitted capacity. We also have reservations. We allow a developer to come in and reserve capacity by putting down 25% of the tap fee. In reservations, we have 96,000 gallons per day of usage. So that puts our total at 143,000 gallons per day. Now, actual flow is only at 25,000 gallons per day. So you can see that even though we're taking these reservations and these allocations, our actual flow will take a while to catch up to that. We won't have to expand the plant until it reaches about 80 or 90% of that capacity. So right now, we have no plans to expand it until we reach that flow rate. All right, talk a little bit about rates. We have a sewer bill and a tap fee. Right now, we've combined three systems, or we're in the process of combining three systems. And you can see the Moyock Central Sewer, we have a base rate of 30 and a usage charge of 1.5 times the water bill and a $5,500 tap fee. Eventually, the other two systems will all equal that same amount. We're doing the other two systems over a 5-year period. For instance, the Moyock Commons started out when we acquired it, had an $80 base rate and was 4 times the water bill. So we're able to lower those.
Why was that, to make up for the tap fees?
Why it was
so much higher in the beginning?
I would have to speculate that it was an expensive wastewater system for a few commercial customers. They probably only have 15 connections. And the cost to build a plant, and in the first several years of that commercial development, for the longest time, there was Food Line and Burger King, and there wasn't a whole lot of other businesses up there. So the rates were high because we had low connections. But as the connections and that commercial development has slowly filled out, it's allowed us to bring the rates down. And when we connected it to the Moyock Central wastewater, bring in more customer base to the table. It's allowed us to even to decrease that further. But it was
That's right, because the Moyock Common plant was a standalone, still doing its own thing for a
correct.
while. That-
Correct.
Okay, right.
Correct.
Okay.
All right, this slide just shows some of our users and what the flows and tap fees we've collected so far. And you can see across the top, we've got the existing users, the Welcome Center, Assisted Living, Southland, Moyock Commons, commercial, fire departments. They've all connected. Down at the bottom are the future developments that we've talked about that have paid a reservation fee, the Moyock Crossing and Lake Views. You can see the total tap fees that we'll collect are $2 million off of what we've signed up so far. Now, of that, we've collected $900,000. The rest of it are due. What we do is we collect 25% up front as a reservation, with the remainder due at final plat. So when they reach final plat, they'll pay.
You mean when the final house is built?
Final plat, before a house is ever built.
Okay.
Their last approval from the Board of Commissioners. Right. Now, in the developer's agreement with Lakeview, we worked out an arrangement where they would pay 25% up front, 50% at final plat, and then 25% at building permit. But that was a special developer's agreement with them. Okay. So what do tap fees do? Right now, tap fees are used primarily to pay the debt. We have a debt on the wastewater plant of $2.7 million. It's a 15-year loan that was taken out in 2012, so we're 2 years into it. The payoff is $2.3 million. It has an average annual debt payment of $250,000. So right now on our tap fees, we've collected about $500,000. We've got $1.2 million in reservations. So that leaves us about $1.1 million remaining on the debt. That's very good. We're only 2 years into it. We paid 60% of the system off already. Our utility bills, the monthly bills, pay primarily the operation and maintenance of the plant. Our O&M for the plant's about $75,000 a year, and we're collecting about $97,000 a year in bills. Now, that's only based on 25,000 gallons per day, which is a quarter of the plant. So there will come a time when our flows increase to a level that the sewer bills will pay for the debt and the operation. But right now, until we get to that point, we have to rely on our tap fees. So as I say, right now, our rates don't generate enough to pay for the debt, but that will as flow increases. So right now, we are dependent on those tap fees and the yearly growth. Examples of yearly growth, or some more examples that we know about, a development right off of Baxter Lane and a development behind Food Line. Those two alone could bring in $700,000, which would come close to paying off the entire debt. As far as expansions goes, a typical, we can grow to 600,000. We're at 100,000 now. So a typical growth would be a 100,000 gallon per day increment. Roughly speaking, that's about a $3 million project.
which is about $270,000 a year if we do the same debt scenario. So right now, we don't have to expand until we reach the 25,000 gallons per day. Grows to 75 or 80,000. By then, we'll be able to have enough money to pay off the existing loan and start payment on a new loan. Or if the flows never increase, there wouldn't be a need to expand. But basically, it works out to needing 40 new houses a year, which will keep paying the debt.
That's just if you were doing it off residential.
That's right. But it's still, whether it comes from commercial or residential,
It's the equivalent.
it's the equivalent, right? We got to keep that cash flow coming in to pay that debt until flows increase. I did want to say something about commercial versus residential. And it is important from an engineering standpoint that we do allow the residential development to hook up to the sewer system. It's important to our flows. We need to generate the flows to pay for, to generate those revenues. We're not seeing it off the commercial development right now. We are seeing it under residential. And from a quality standpoint, commercial is difficult on a wastewater plant. These restaurants and businesses primarily have the fats, oils, and greases, where the residential has a much better nutrient. I'll just leave it at that. I think y'all understand.
Be way more information than I need.
But
What is the difference in percentage, I guess, how many commercial versus residential? What's the percentage in difference?
well, what we're doing is we call it an equivalent dwelling unit. An equivalent dwelling unit is 250 gallons per day. So if you had a business generating 500 gallons per day, that would be 2 equivalent dwelling units or 2 tap fees, $11,000.
And how many commercial businesses actually are hooked up to it versus how many residential at this time? Do you have any idea?
Well, actually, I get to use this slide. You can notice the first 3/4 of that slide are all commercial. Welcome centers, assisted living, Southland, Moyock Commons, fire station, doctor's office. So really the only commercial we have right now is Newtown, but we have 2 developments.
I mean, only residential.
Only residential we have is Newtown. Thank you, sir.
And how come Newtown, I mean, give a little history behind
Newtown had a failing sewer system. They had an old LPP sewer system that was failing.
Had a single source system
Right,
specifically for that little area,
that's right.
and it was failing, correct?
And we actually got a grant to replace their pump station, which would allow them to hook up to the central sewer system, and we could abandon that old drain field.
Mm-hmm.
So the residential we have that you see at the bottom are the Moyock Crossing and the Lakeview.
And was not Newtown, that was a part of the plan in the inception of the idea for the central plant, correct?
That's correct. Yes, sir.
So, just a couple of questions before I get too far. So, you're telling me that the 1.2 million in reservation fees that you told us, you said 90% of those are residential, roughly, for developments and residential developments?
The reservation fees?
Yes.
You can see those 2 at the bottom.
Yes. But that bottom one, that commercial piece of that's going to be a small portion, correct?
Oh, State Line Builders. Yeah, that's very small. That was only 250 gallons per day of flow. These other 2 are generating $1.5 million almost in tap fees.
So when you're talking about the potential growth in the future, are you basing that more or less on the residential developments right now that you see coming, or commercial?
Residential, yes, sir.
And then when this first was thought, this sewage system was first come into play, you talked earlier about you were designing it, I guess for the different types of waste that goes into. You said commercial is more taxing on the sewer system. Was that not factored in when we were first designing this, or has this come to play now?
It was factored in, but it's also coming into play now. Reality is that the plant meets its limits, it does its job, but it puts a burden on the operation of the system.
So the more commercial we get on there, the higher maintenance fees potentially could be then, is what you're saying?
It depends on what kind of commercial you're connecting.
I mean, but it could possibly increase the maintenance
Restaurants
fees,
are tough on central wastewater systems. If you have businesses, manufacturing, industrial warehousing, their contribution isn't going to be much different than a residential contribution would be. But when you have restaurants, it's a tough contribution.
It's more of we have to do more monitoring on the restaurants. They have grease interceptors and things that we need to make sure stay operational. There is no dilution right now to what's coming from those restaurants. So I don't know if you could say it's costing more money in operation and maintenance, but it is more difficult to make that plant meet its limits.
So in following what he said, we were hoping for more commercial, it just didn't happen?
It's not happening, no, sir.
It hasn't happened yet.
That's what I meant to say.
And of the reservations that we have, I noticed on your figure several slides back towards the beginning, how many of those are actually paid, or how many of those people, like, I remember one time we talked about all these houses, if they were built today, we'd have 400 and some odd houses or something that were on the plan. How many of those are actually paid reservations, to where if we had commercial come in today, we wouldn't have to worry about turning them down until we expanded the sewer system?
All right, so what you're asking for is how many houses do we have hooked up?
That were, or have paid their reservations that we're committed to.
I would put that in the range of about 300 houses. You see, just on the bottom two developments there alone are about 250 houses. Right. And they've only paid 25%, though.
But once you start paying, you're guaranteed a spot there. If they were to hook up tomorrow, we'd have to have it available.
Oh, that's correct. Yeah.
But
it won't happen that way, though. They'll
right.
build it in phases.
I think another thing to remember when we're having this conversation is that 40,000 capacity at Moyock Commons is being held in the event we did have a big commercial use to come in. So we did save some capacity for that to make sure we didn't get caught with a big commercial interest coming in and then we can't meet it. So we did plan for that.
And we've already worked through, in order to look at the next step in expanding the system, we'd have to go through an environmental assessment. We're at the final stages of that. That can be about an 18-month process. We're wrapping that up. So we've already started going through the proper permitting requirements to expand the system. So if we had a business that was to come in tomorrow that would overwhelm what our available capacity is, we could move pretty quickly in having that plant expanded, more than likely on the same schedule that it would take a business to select a site, take a person down, and build their property. We could be with them.
I think another thing to remember and the consideration when this whole process started with a previous board, but one of the considerations was that there were business owners in Moyock at the time. Things were going good. They were looking to expand, but they had these huge drain fields that was property they couldn't use, but with a wastewater system they would be able to expand, or new businesses could open up without having the property in Moyock was going at $50,000 for, well, I'll say farmland, and one place went for $50,000, not in Moyock, an acre. But you're talking $100,000 and $200,000 for a lot up there, and then you had to buy extra land for wastewater capacity without the system. So I think that was one of the considerations that was taken in also at this time.
And I would add to that the stormwater. We've actually met with clients in the past who are looking at the combination of having to buy enough land to meet the footprint of your building to be able to address your stormwater issues, a stormwater pond, some kind of on-site retention because of the poor soils, and because of the poor soils, the amount of drainage field you would need would make a potential developer have to buy way more property than they would generally want to buy. It ties their capital up in land acquisition, and they were having a hard time making a project financially work. So by bringing a wastewater element, now that we've got natural gas up there, we've got water up there, we've got wastewater now, hopefully it makes the area up there more marketable, and a preferred spot now to start locating. And we are talking with clients now that previously were not talking to us because of these constraints they had up there to develop a site. So it was always envisioned that this plant would encourage and spur commercial development, but I think it was also understood that it would take time for that to happen. And we're seeing that appears to be true at this time.
Part of the whole thinking too, in the wastewater deal, if I remember correctly, is we were right in the middle of a recession, a big recession, probably the biggest that this country's had since the Depression. And one of the things I remember being discussed, and we talked about it, is positioning, as you just said, positioning ourselves in a place to where once the bad times went away and people did start wanting to grow with business, well, we would have the major infrastructure in place to let it happen. So that certainly was part of the discussions as well that I remember having.
Yeah, and of course we have the port north of us is set for major expansion because we'll be able to handle those large ships
And all the work we've done with
that
that.
are being built. So that is the hope and the vision, and it just takes time to see where it goes.
I think there's a genuine concern in the Moyock area about the wastewater plant and what the impact is to residential development. We've heard it in here several times. I would refer you back to that map. The force main of this system is only a 168, and there is no plan under the system to expand that force main beyond 168. Well, our intention is to go down 168 to make that quarterable, more marketable for commercial development. If a residential project comes in, they have to either get proper zoning, get their approvals from the board, and at their cost expand to get to the system. So just because the system exists in Moyock doesn't necessarily mean every project up there has an opportunity to connect, because at some point in time it gets cost prohibitive for them to come to the force main because it only exists on 168. An example of that is going to be a project that's coming to you in the next several months, who always envisioned connecting to this system, but now they have, and it's a sizable project, and now they've determined it's cost prohibitive. So they're actually going to go to on-site septic. So the residential has to still get to the force main. The force main is only on 168, and there's no plans in the system to expand beyond 168.
Yeah, I think my only concern was that, the economy, I mean, if you look at it out there, it still stinks. And so I don't, and again, when I saw years ago, commercial development, they weren't expanding, and I don't foresee that anytime soon. So it just sounds like to me we're going to be relying more on residential developments to help pay for this sewage system, which, I hope that's not the case. I hope we can attract some businesses in there, because I think commercial is what we need to do to get this paid for. That was my concern. I just don't, with the economy, I just don't see that happening.
And you say 40 houses a year is the minimum we need?
That would generate enough money to pay the debt service. 40 times 5,500 is...
Or some commercial, which would be balancing out. Got it.
That's right.
And I want to ask a question. By the way, Mr. Woody is here tonight, but he is an expectant father, and if he has to leave early, that is why. And we have Miss Donna here tonight to fill in the event he has to leave. So that's how close he is to being a father again. But I do want to ask you a question since you're still on the clock. Is there any subdivision under the Unified Development Ordinance that gets extra density or anything because they hook into a wastewater system, ours or a private one, under the Unified Development Ordinance? Do you get any bonus for...
You don't get density bonuses for wastewater system, no.
So...
I mean, you're allowed... the zoning district set out density, and as part of your bundle of rights that go with that property, you're allowed to obtain whatever maximum density UDO sets out.
Right. But by hooking into the county, it doesn't give you an extra bonus, or if you put
No,
in your
I
own
mean,
wastewater
they could build their own wastewater system as well. So
and achieve the same
Density.
that was
Yes.
my question. All right.
So as you just said, so then where does that lie? If you want to address, let's face it, if you want to address lot size and density, you need to go back to the zoning and the Unified Development Ordinance to do that.
I think so. If there's goals that the board wants to achieve in terms of residential development, I think you should frame those and address those through your zoning district regulations, and not necessarily a wastewater policy per se. If the zoning doesn't work, then fix the zoning.
I mean, I'll say it right now. I certainly am not a fan of 10,000 square foot lot sizes. I'm not a fan of it. Is there in places in the county to where maybe that is logical, makes some sense? The answer to that could be possibly yeah. But when it becomes that that's what you're looking at for here and there and everything that's moving along, I certainly am not a fan of it. And I welcome the conversations to try to solve the issues. I certainly do. So.
Well, I'll add to that. We have one zoning that creates that issue, and that's the conservation subdivision.
That's
Is
right.
that not correct?
It is a conservation subdivision is a by right option, so you see those as use permits, which are more limiting in your discretion. There are other districts, such as a plan unit development, that can allow sewer in these smaller lots, but of course those would generally need a rezoning, so you have more discretion in whether or not you approve those or not.
But the main culprit in this issue
Conservation
is
subdivision
conservation.
is what you're seeing primarily to this point.
Because you do get density bonuses. For
You do
those.
for that subdivision type. That's correct.
For everything from wetlands allocations to whatever. I mean, it's certainly.
Okay. Eric, continue. Or are you done?
I was done.
You did a very good job. Any more questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eric.
Appreciate it.
I do, but not a very. Okay. Ben, I thought that, or is the area use plan also figured into, because we hear consistently that this housing development is in accordance with what was laid out in the area use plan.
Mm-hmm.
So is it that, or is it the UDO?
It's both. I mean, the land use plan and the small area plan, both those plans set out desirable densities for areas, which full service is what we see a lot of these requests come in under, and full service is 3 units per acre. The UDO is the tool that allows a property owner or developer to achieve those densities. So yeah, but the land use plan is prescribing density goals, and then the UDO is a tool for which you achieve those.
And to reiterate, the issue we've had is we've solicited resident input on that area use plan, which was used to create the area use plan. So the citizens of Currituck County said, this is what we want. And now we're back to it's a living document. And certainly if it continues to cause issues, we need to circle back around and reevaluate that.
And change
But it
what
goes
needs
back
to be
to
changed.
without participation,
Right.
we operate in a vacuum. So it was what was adopted back in the day. Maybe it's time to revisit it. But unless people participate, we get what we get.
You get post-fact participation a lot of times.
Well, the document's 10 years old, is it not? I mean, wasn't it done about 10 years ago?
Yeah, the land use
Small
plan
area plan we just did.
Well, I know small area plans, that's right, that's different, but
It all started with the rezoning of all this property and some of the other things with the land use back in 2006.
Right.
Yeah, the full service was created with the land use plan in 2006. That's correct. So that's kind of the basis. And the small area plan's really just built off that larger document.
So it may be time to circle back and look at it again and address the issues that are creating the concern.
I think the discussion was held a year ago that it was time to take a look at the land use plan and update it, I think, as we got talking about all these small area plans and everything else. It seemed to me like I remember Mr. Woody suggesting that the land use plan was probably the right thing to do at that time. Best of my recollection.
Yeah, I think the staff did, and I think it still is a priority for the staff, and I believe for the board too, based on recent public hearings. So,
All right. Any other questions? Eric, thank you. And we'll move on to public hearings. Consideration and action on PB 1428 Spruill Sand Mine. Request for a use permit to operate an extractive industry sand mine located at 913 Currituck Highway, tax map 15, parcel 31 and 32B, Moyock Township. Is the public hearing still open, or did we close?
It was closed at the last meeting.
So tonight you're going to present the facts and the board can make a motion.
That's correct.
Okay. Proceed.
At the last meeting, the public hearing was closed, and this item was continued to allow the applicant to provide information related to the state permitting of the mining operation. The county has received that at your place tonight. I placed a letter from Janet Boyer with the North Carolina Department of Environment and Natural Resources. And what this letter confirms is that the mining permit has been modified at the state level to exclude a portion of this site from the state mining permit. That has been approved. So at this point, all the state permits for this mine are in order, and that threshold has been met. So now before you tonight as a board is to determine if you will or will not issue the use permit for this mining operation to continue. And I'm not going to cover the case analysis again, so I can answer any questions you have on that action. Thank you.
Questions of Mr. Woody? All right.
Well, in reference to, again, going back, the state says all the permits are in place.
That's correct. The state permits have been modified and approved.
And one of the things I think we talked about in previous was whether or not Mr. Spruill had contracts coming in to get enough fill. Has that been met?
I do not have a contract from Mr. Spruill that indicates where the fill will be coming from, the source of that material to fill in a portion of this mine to bring it into compliance with the UDO. The testimony he provided at the last meeting effectively said he would have the 5-acre area filled in within 2 years.
And I believe, Mr. Hall, at that conversation we discussed putting in a quarterly reporting, and every 3 months he'd have to make a report to make sure he is making the progress to satisfy the condition of filling back in the overmined area. Is that not correct?
It's correct. The site was not by state and meets state requirements, but by county standards, the site is overmined by 5.65 acres of area.
Mr. Woody, I do have a question. I mean, what was the, I guess there was also in here a request for the setback. I mean, was there a reason for that, the adjustment of that?
The request for the setback was probably to allow them to continue to mine areas that are in close proximity to property lines. The ordinance allows that as long as there's a buffer that exists, and there is. I would say that setback reduction is pretty standard for most mines in Currituck County. But I will say this: the area that they've requested the setback reduction really is already mined. So in some ways, it's just aligning the permit, I think, with the actual conditions of the site.
Let me ask you one last question. I see the state permit has to be renewed again in October of this year.
That's correct.
Would it not be appropriate that our permit run concurrent with that one, at least until October? And then from that point, we could...
That would be an absolute way to ensure that the use permit is in sync with the state permitting process.
Running in concurrence, in my opinion.
Yeah, you could, as part of your motion, you could require that the county permit be reevaluated in October of 2015 as well.
I think it's also important to expand that to other similarly permitted ventures in the county, that the permits run concurrent, so we don't have these one permits expiring but the other one's good, and the confusion that is attendant with that. So I would say that not only we do it for this particular instance if we go forward with it, but that we move forward in the future with trying to bring the other similarly permitted ventures into compliance with concurrently running permits.
And if the board wanted staff to do that, we would need to prepare a text amendment to the UDO to make that apply countywide, which is not an issue. Staff can do that if directed.
Well, I would ask you for staff, for the purposes of staff and for the county, wouldn't that make it easier on all the parties
Involved.
the parties involved? Because theoretically, you could have the state say yes, but the county say no. So you could theoretically have
Vice versa.
or vice versa, concurrently have opposing permits, and that's confusing.
From my perspective, I think it would make it easier. I can't speak for the applicants or the mine owners, but I think a lot of times when they renew their state permits, I think a lot of times they forget to renew their county permits. So if those were concurrent, you may avoid some of those situations.
Since this is not a part of this actual permit that
exactly.
we're doing, let's, after we take action on this, we can direct staff to do that. How about that? Is there any other questions of Mr. Woody?
The only one I had is I'm looking through the motion statement here. I thought we had talked about hauling Saturdays and Sundays, not allowing hauling on. I just see Saturday in this. Whoever makes the motion, I just see Saturday in this statement. I thought we had discussed last time.
But by ordinance, mines can't haul on Sundays.
Got it.
So that's
Thank
already
you.
a limitation. So
Got it.
if you choose to limit Saturdays on peak travel
Got it.
summer months, you would
Got
include
it.
that in your motion.
Got it.
It also in here says semi-annual reports. I prefer to see a quarterly. If somebody makes a motion for approval.
And
And
again, I fall back on that same part. Mr. Spruill, one of the reasons we tabled it last time was because he said he was going to be getting contracts in. Can we ask if he's got them today?
Mr. McCree, we've closed the public hearing. Can
I
we?
think we need to be careful we don't move into a situation where we're going to be receiving information that
Additional
will not become
testimony.
part of the record without it being conducted in the context of a hearing.
One of the things we can do.
Go ahead.
One of the things we can do to answer that, I think, and maybe we can discuss it now, is that pursuant to the quarterly report that we would receive that would be certified by a surveyor or an engineer, that the pro rata portion of the fill was taking place would get where you want to go, and that is that you are proceeding with the refill in a timely manner, which would then, it would obviously have to have the contracts in place. If they weren't, then you wouldn't be getting the fill, and we would be notified at the quarterly junction of the report.
Wouldn't it not be that you're requiring him to submit a report to show what progress is being made? If at some point in time progress is not being made, then you could pull the special use permit, correct?
That's correct. The first quarter, you'll know whether he has contracts to fill it back. Second quarter, you'll really know
Right.
whether. So
Yeah.
I think that will probably address what you're asking without opening up the process again.
Now, probably one of the things we need to address is the what ifs. The what if at the end of the first quarter, insufficient fill pro rata is being placed in the area, then what do we do? Do we give a 3-month grace period, and then at the end of 6 months? I mean, that's something that probably we need to discuss, and pursuant to whatever we do, have that as part of it so we know.
I think you'd have to do that.
I don't recall, but I just remember his testimony saying within 2 years he would have it refilled. I didn't hear him say anything about he was going to do 10% a month for any given time. He said in a 2-year period he was going to have it refilled. That was the testimony he gave to us, I believe.
And one of the reasons we tabled it was because he said he would have those contracts available to us,
Yeah.
By the next meeting. He thought he could have it in a few weeks. And that's one of the reasons we tabled. I understand where we're at, but it was one of the things that was in the discussion.
And again, for the quarterly report, I think what we're trying to do, if we wait for 2 years and it's not done, then what?
I have no
The
problem with
permit's
quarterly
expired, and then what? So I think we're just trying to, it's the old trust but verify.
There's a couple of things that I see in play here. The first one is, and we had testimony that depending on the time of year, that's going to be up or down, as far as what area is backfilled. I would suggest to you, we really don't care if he's got a contract that provides the fill to backfill the mine, as long as the area gets backfilled. And so the metric that we're using to determine our progress along those lines resides in that semi-annual is what we originally had suggested, but, we would like to probably institute a quarterly review of that, which is going to give us a how goes it. And at the end of the day, I would suggest to you that if at 1 year and 8 months we are 90% filled and it doesn't look like we're going to quite get to it in 2 years, we're not going to necessarily revoke the permit. We just want to make sure that there's a metric in place and the writing is here so that if it's a complete abandonment of the policy or the permit that we're establishing, that we have the means by which that permit can be revoked. The end of the day, what do we want as the county commissioner, as the county representatives? We want the area backfilled that needs to be backfilled. I would suggest, other than monitoring it, it's Mr. Spruill's job to mine, not ours.
So I would go back to the original conversation we had, require quarterly reports. At the end of the first quarter, we're not making progress, then everybody is put on notice that at the end of the second quarter, if you're not caught up, then the board is going to have a revocation hearing. I'll say
Absolutely.
And no reduction in setback.
Right.
The only thing I'm concerned about too, I want to make sure we got consistency with our use permits, because and what you brought up, Mr. Beaumont, is if we're at, we got a few months to go and he's not quite there and he doesn't meet in 2 years. I mean, to me, we have the guidelines, we stick to them, we have consistency. I don't want to be like we're showing favoritism for one, and then somebody else doesn't meet a requirement in another one, and we hold that one to different guidelines. If we're going to say 2 years, then 2 years it's going to be filled. And if we do quarterly reports in 6 months, he's got to be at a certain stage.
Well, I think Mr. Spruill said he'd have it done. I think his engineer said he'd have it done, and I believe that they will have it done. But we make it part of the permit. If it's not done, then we do our responsibility as commissioners. So I guess what we need is we have a few elements we need to add into if we're going to do the approval, and unless you have other questions, we need to go ahead and someone put it together in a motion and let's move.
I would be happy to make a motion.
Mr. Chair, before you have a point of clarification.
Yes, sir.
In your conversation about these quarterly or semi-annually reports that we're going to get, the way the motion is written, it appears as long as there is an effort to backfill, that is acceptable. Or are you looking for some pro rata portion that has to be accomplished at each of these reporting periods?
I think you would expect the
certain
pro
percent.
rata
Yeah.
portion of that corresponds with the quarter.
Okay. Just make sure that's clearly what the intent is.
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve PB 14-TAC 28 with the staff findings and recommendations included in the case analysis and the following additional findings and conclusions. The applicant may continue excavating the site provided the over-excavated area of the site is brought into compliance within 2 years. Quarterly reports prepared by a registered surveyor or engineer that estimate the percentage of fill added to the over-excavated area must be filed with the planning department. If it is determined that the over-excavated area of the site is not filled pro rata, i.e. proportionally, during the 2-year time frame, the county will initiate permit revocation. Hauling shall be prohibited on Saturdays from Memorial Day to Labor Day, and would also move that the county permit be aligned to that with the state permit.
And I would ask no reduction in setback?
With no reduction in setback.
All right, we have a motion.
I'll second that.
I have a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. New business, consideration and approval of an ordinance amending Section 9.5 of the Currituck County Code of Ordinances to provide that the county's ocean rescue contractor shall have authority to determine unsafe swimming conditions in the Atlantic Ocean and to prohibit swimming until safe. Mr. McCree.
Mr. Chairman, this is an ordinance amendment in order to allow for a new ocean rescue contractor to have the authority to make a determination when conditions are unsafe for swimming in the Atlantic Ocean. In the past, and in great respect because I guess Kerala Fire and Rescue and its subsidiary was our ocean rescue contractor, the fire chief of Kerala Fire and Rescue had that authority. As you see in the proposed ordinance amendment, the language with a strike through is that which is to be deleted, and the language that is underlined is that which will be added. I will note on line 30 of the proposed ordinance, after the stricken words chief of the Kerala Fire and Rescue, the words county's ocean rescue contractor should be underlined. That was left out in this draft, but that should be underlined, indicating that is language being added to this ordinance.
Mine is underlined.
I'd be glad on line 30. It is underlined?
No, I'm on 24. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Sorry.
But with that, I'll be glad to answer any questions any board member may have, and remind you as well that because all of you are not present tonight, it will be necessary for this ordinance to come back for a second reading because anytime an ordinance is first presented to a board, it must pass by unanimous vote. It will have, therefore, we'll have to come back to you for a second reading, at which time it can be adopted by a simple majority.
All right, questions from Mr. McCree?
I have one. I mean, just a thought. Would it be smarter to identify a particular position within that? I mean, as it sounds like to me, we're identifying a subsidy, so that could mean anybody that within a given day, within that organization, may, under this, have the authority to do that.
That decision,
Yeah.
I mean, on face value, the corporation that is making that decision, typically there are only certain entities within a corporation that are capable of making that or making corporate decisions of which that would fall under. So that'd have to be bylaw probably driven.
I understand that, Mr. Beaumont. I'm simply trying to make it consistent with what was there in the past, where it was Kerala Ocean Rescue and it said the fire chief.
Well, that's exactly the thinking, though, and because we don't know in the future, we're trying not to have to amend it again. We don't know in the future what type of entity might be the ocean rescue contractor, but the way it's drafted, it would contemplate that that the corporation and its corporate structure and hierarchy will determine who will make the call.
As long as there's a reason, that's all that's fine.
All right, any other questions? All right, hearing none, do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve.
I have a motion for approval.
I would second that.
Second, any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Next item is Dune Restoration Cost Share Program. Would that be Mr. Woody? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is basically a grant program that we have discussed similar versions of this with previous boards, but we bring you this presentation tonight to try to formalize this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a minute to kind of go through, at a basic level, the importance of dunes. I think most, the board certainly, and most of the public probably understands why dunes are important, but I want to reinforce that and then get into the actual program itself, how this is funded and what it makes available to the property owners on the beach and kind of how it would be managed by the staff should the board approve it. So real quickly, dunes, as you know, protect property. The primary purpose of a dune is not only to protect an oceanfront house or lot, but oftentimes protect, second, 3, 4 rows back. And the reason that dunes do that is, quite frankly, they limit storm-induced erosion, so they withstand the wave action from the ocean during a storm. They help with just normal erosion processes that we see on the beaches. Strong dunes do. They help with the profile of the beach. The sand from the dune can in a storm can wash off the dune and help restore the profile of the beach so it can be used and enjoyed by people that are recreating here in Currituck County. Even can help with wave heights. It can kind of diminish the strength and height of waves that come from a storm. So dunes are very important. And even on kind of, we don't think about this, but dunes even impact the way flood maps are approved by the state. And as you know, if you're in a flood zone, you certainly will pay more insurance, and it has more impact on people's ability to invest in a community. One thing I like to say about Currituck, I think our flood maps, if you look, for the most part, we have a lot of properties that aren't negatively impacted by changes to flood maps because our flood maps usually don't change significantly, and a lot of that's because we have dense dune structures on our beaches. The density of a dune, the volume of a dune help limit the breadth of a flood zone. So dunes make a lot of sense and are really important, particularly for a community whose probably majority source of their tax base is located behind those dunes. So real quickly, there are a lot of ways to protect oceanfront property and inland property just behind the oceanfront, but there are 6 basic tools that communities use to build their dune systems or protect the oceanfront from storms. There are other ones. I mean, people do beach nourishment and things, which is probably a form of importing sand. But these are the 6 that generally come to mind. I'm going to cover 3 tonight. The 3 I'm going to cover are natural dune recovery, which is the best way to grow dunes. But to have natural dune recovery, you have to start with the dune first and foremost. Dune vegetation, which is what the grant covers. This grant program is aimed at promoting and incentivizing vegetation of dunes. And finally, sand fencing. Those are the 3 things that are probably least expensive and have, in my opinion, some of the greatest impact on protection of oceanfront property. Natural dune recovery. If you've got dunes that are vegetated and have large dune density, like Currituck County does, for the most part, our county has a good dune system. There are some spots where the erosion rates are high and the dunes really struggle, but generally we have a good dune system in Currituck County. And as you can see, what happens is following a storm, the dune escarps. So what that means is you have a shear, like a wall. The dune cuts in half, basically. And that sand is washed out to maybe it goes down the Nag's Head, maybe it doesn't, but it washes out.
They need it.
They need it, that's right. We send a little sand down that way. But what happens is when you have a dune that's vegetated, and you can see in the picture, after the escarpment's there, it begins to collapse on itself. So as that sand starts to fall over and the dune starts to collapse, the overall dune profile initially lowers a little bit. But what happens is that vegetation that falls to the front of the dune, it actually lives a lot of times and it regrows and it begins to collect sand. So that front part of the dune will begin to collect sand from the vegetation that falls, revegetates itself, and slowly over time it builds the dune back. It just happens. It's just the way it works. It doesn't require any intervention by anybody at the county or property owner level. Sometimes what you see happen, which I think is probably, in my opinion, unfortunate, is a lot of times you see these escarped dunes, and the first thing that property owners do is they go out and get a bulldozer on the beach and they push sand off the beach to pile it up in the front of the dune. The downside of that is when you push that sand to the front of the dune, you're actually covering up the vegetation that would otherwise grow, and then your front of your dune is just a pile of sand without any kind of structure. Piles of sand wash right away the next time the water's up. So ideally, now there are times when your dune's completely gone, and to protect your property, you probably want to push a pile of sand up there because something's better than nothing. But generally, if a dune is vegetated and it's dense, it will take care of itself. These are examples of dunes in Corova Beach. These are natural dunes. You can see the vegetation is dense, it's extensive. These dunes withhold well. I think Mr. Odlick can probably attest to that. You'll see the escarpment after storms a lot of times, and over a couple of years, they will replenish and grow back. Again, you see some additional dunes in Swan Beach.
Interesting, Mr. Woody. Back to that second slide. Every time there's a storm, I mean, you have all the grasses and the reeds and all that stuff that piles up on the beach. What you see out on the front part, all that green, is the byproduct of sand that was caught by all that trash that remained that didn't get cleaned up. Started a whole new set of dune lines there. And I guarantee you it's much higher today than what it was there.
That's right.
But the growth and everything that's taking place in that, I mean, it would build up to where you couldn't drive across it in a short period of time. That's
right. What you see is trash from storms. Storms actually generates plant growth on either side of the dune. Here's the dune in Wellhead, and again, you can see after a storm, it escarps down the front, and you can see the sea oats on the top and the beach grass on the front there, and it begins, again, that grass, it collects sand, and it builds. The roots spread through the dune. The roots, they don't prevent erosion, but they provide structure to the dune, and it just kind of self-perpetuates itself. dune vegetation. So this is the primary part of this presentation. I'll get into the program. This dune cost share program actually promotes the planting of dune vegetation on dunes. And so what the dune vegetation does is, as I said, it basically traps sand and it builds a dune. And it has roots that spread extensively through the dune, give it structure, helps it form. One of the best things that you can do as a property owner is plant your dunes. And now the key is you can't plant them one time and never do it again. It's a program. It's got to be done really ideally every year or every couple of years. You're planting your dune and you're growing it. So it never really stops. It's something that's perpetual, but it's a lot cheaper to plant dune vegetation and to try to grow your dunes naturally than it is to import sand or bring sand in. Those can be very costly procedures. Here in Ocean Hill 1, you can see a dune planting program, and you see on the top of the dune some existing sea oats, and you can see on the front of the dune some sprigs of beach grass. Again, these ones actually are irrigated. That's probably more than you need to do. You really don't need to irrigate the dune plantings. You can, but if you plant them in the right time of year, they usually take care of themselves. These dune plants are very hardy, and they actually can be difficult to kill, provided you plant them at the right time of year and put a drop of fertilizer in the hole. Last thing I want to say is when you've planted the dunes, the other thing you see this all the time on the beach is sand fencing. Sand fencing is a very cheap way to help, inexpensive way to begin to build your dune. Number one is, again, it collects sand. When the sand blows, it hits the fence and drops down, so it helps the dune grow that way. Works best in concert with dune vegetation. The other advantage of sand fence is, quite frankly, it just keeps people off your dunes. A lot of times when you have sand fencing up, it keeps vehicles off the dunes, people, it just kind of blocks that kind of foot traffic on the dunes, so it really serves that purpose as well. Here you can see some sand fencing in Swan Beach. The one thing about sand fencing is it doesn't grow, so once the sand fence is covered with sand, it's lost its useful purpose, whereas dune vegetation actually continues to grow and run roots and new plants as the dune grows. It kind of self-perpetuates. Again, here you can see sand fencing put out along with some vegetation on the dunes. That's probably the ideal cost-effective scenario for building a dune system. So when you're managing your dunes, ideally what you want to do is grow your dunes landward as much as possible. So what that means is you want to grow your dune density toward your house as opposed to toward the ocean, because obviously the ocean, as always, is going to wash away sand and escarp dunes. There are some subdivisions in the county, such as Pine Island, that actually as a community, they grow their dunes landward, and they have very dense and significant dunes in that community. Landward dune building they get taller, wider, denser. The more volume of sand in a dune, the more protection it provides. And of course, one key to that is having planted dunes with vegetation to help those become a successful and useful dune system. So that's the kind of the Dune 101. So what that brings us to is the Dune Cost Share Program. And I've worked with the county manager's office on this, and we've developed an initial budget, which is $7,500 of occupancy tax, and that is a cost match program, and that's intended to address storm protection on the Outer Banks. What it does is it allows a property owner or a subdivision in some cases to apply for this grant money up to, there's individual maximums, but the total budget is $7,500. It requires matching funds. So basically, if you want to participate, you've got to bring 50% of the cost to the table as a property owner. So the county's only covering half of the plant cost. If we have more grant applications than money, so for example, there's more than $7,500 of requests received, the county would then use a competitive scoring process. And in your agenda packet, there's a sheet that shows how you would score properties. And of course, the ones that have higher erosion rates or less dune density are probably in greater need of having the vegetation and the assistance. Program is available to any property containing a primary frontal dune. You want to grow the primary frontal dune as much as possible. The funds are used to purchase sea oats and fertilizer, and that's it. The reason that we chose sea oats is sea oats are they're the plants that go on the top of the dune. They're much less labor intensive. Probably a group of us could go out and plant, several hundred feet of sea oats. Beach grass, on the other hand, is a little more expensive and significantly more labor intensive. Very difficult to plant beach grass unless you have a large work crew to do that. So sea oats is something that most property owners or communities can probably manage. It's an important plant in the dune structure. So that's what this grant is intended to cover. The installation and maintenance of the plant is the responsibility of the property owner. Obviously, the staff will sit down and work with the property owner to make sure they understand the proper time, way, and method to plant these plants. But ultimately, the installation is up to the property owner. Staff will inspect to make sure the plants are planted properly and that they live. If the plants are not planted properly, if there's improper installation, then the recipient of the grant will have to not only pay for their share, the county share of the plants, but also pay an administrative fee. And of course, all that is included in the grant agreement that's in the agenda packet as well. It kind of specifies basically the callback provision of the grant and kind of how it's administered by the county. So let me give an example real quick. The way this grant is structured initially, there's a maximum of $7,500 available. The maximum individual award is $1,275. So that means that if you as a property owner have $1,275 to pay towards plants, the county will match that. That will total together, the match, the county's part and the property owner's match will buy 2,250 plants and fertilizer. That will provide 1,500 to 3,000 linear feet of oceanfront. So if you come forward with $1,200 for this program and the county provides a matching part, you can basically vegetate 1,500 to 3,000 linear feet of oceanfront. So that's a quarter mile to over a half mile. That's a lot of sea oats and covers a lot of area for a very low price. Minimum individual award is $4,250. So if you want to do your individual 100-foot wide lot, then you can bring $4,250 to the table and we'll consider your application. That buys 75 plants and fertilizer and does 100 feet of oceanfront. We chose that as a minimum because that's about the width of a typical lot in Currituck County on the oceanfront. The reason we did minimum lot, now ideally you would vegetate multiple lots or even an entire plan unit development, but the reason we did these smaller awards is there's not organized neighborhood or community associations in the off-road area. So we wanted to make this program available to people outside of PUDs. So if you and a couple of neighbors in the off-road area wanted to come together and revegetate 4 or 5 dunes or 4 or 5 lots, we wanted to make that an opportunity. That concludes my presentation. The application material is in your agenda packets.
I have a question.
Okay.
I'm looking at the application, where it's describing the administrative process, page 104, and under the cost share block, I think that it needs to be reworded potentially because it says that the county will provide. Okay, it says the cost of 75 sea oats and plants is $85.
Right.
The county will provide the same number of plants and fertilizer for $4,250. So it reads to me as though the homeowner pays $85 and then the county contributes the same number for an additional $4,250.
Yeah, we can correct that. The intent is that the homeowner would pay $4,250 and the
Right,
county would pay
right.
$4,250.
Understood.
Yeah, we can tweak that language.
And the rest of the application reads that way. So
Yeah,
that's-
we'll
I
get
think- I
it
think you're
consistent.
Then is that one row of plantings? A single row of plantings?
No, it's what it is. It is two to three rows, or excuse me, it's 3 rows of plants spaced 4 feet apart. 3 rows of plants spaced 2 to 4 feet apart. So it's a minimum of 75 plants, basically per 100 feet, a maximum of 150 plants per 100 feet. So the denser the planting, the better. But if you wanted to spread if you wanted to do just a couple of rows and a little less plants, you could do that and spread it out more.
I'm trying to think through in my mind the effectiveness of that. It's just, it's.
Well, sea oats you generally just plant across the tops of the dune. In theory, that the roots begin to run down the dune, and the roots actually regenerate additional plants. It's small, but it's just a start towards building some capacity for this type of program.
From just my personal thoughts, I think at some point in time we need to reconsider the seagrass parts as well, instead of just the sea oats, and do something with that as well. It might be a little more intensive. we're not doing the labor part of it, so who cares? If a community group wants to get together and do it, they're going to provide the labor. I mean, I think that's where you get most of the bang for your buck. If you look back at those pictures that we seen and where it had revegetated itself, you're not seeing any sea oats there. I mean, as the scarfing is concerned and this, that, and other, you're not going to see sea oats there. You're going to see grasses and other types of vegetation that's going to be the building of the structure for that dune again. But it's better than, it's a start.
And certainly, this year you could do the COs if you wanted to modify it and dedicate a portion of the funding for beach grass, or you could even just let the individual property owner choose what they want to do.
I mean, it's like this. If we don't protect the dunes that are there, sooner or later, we're going to be sitting here talking about $30 million on how we're going to restore them, or else it's all going to go away, one or the other. So pay me now or pay me later.
Any other questions? I have one comment, Ben. Would it not be cleaner and easier if it was a cost reimbursement instead of a cost sharing? Because you were talking about if they don't install it right, you got to do a clawback. Well, if they don't install it right, you just don't cost share.
It could.
You don't reimburse. Just a thought. I mean, you're not talking much money, but weren't trying to confuse the issue.
And I think it could be structured. It could be structured that way. It just means because we're going to order the plants and have them delivered to the satellite office, so it just means that the applicant would have to obviously pay that initial capital or that initial cost for the plants, and then we would reimburse. And that's how a lot of grants work from the state level. So that's not unusual.
Well, and the issue is, just like in Nag's Head, where they've spent how many tens of millions of dollars on beach nourishment. Had they had a program like this where they built the dunes up, they might not be spending those tens of millions of dollars in dune restoration and
That was
beach
my last
nourishment.
comment point right there, exactly.
And at some point, that if we can spend a couple of dollars to get the dunes strong and healthy.
It's a good investment.
Yeah. So, all right, any other questions? Then I guess you need a motion from the board. Anybody can do it.
I'll certainly make a motion to approve it. I mean, as far as what you're talking about, the difference between cost sharing, I mean, I will make the motion and then allow them to set it up however they deem necessary, taking into account your comments. Is that okay, Ben?
The staff will evaluate that as an alternative to manage the program, and we'll discuss that with the manager and the finance director.
Move to approve with the ability for staff to figure out how they're going to do it. Thank you.
All right,
I second
we have
it.
Motion, a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries.
A quick question. Will we get feedback? My expectation is we're going to burn through the amount of money really quickly.
I think so, yes.
So that, and it certainly is a lot of bang for the buck. My thought would be it's something that we're going to put in place and then look at scaling upward.
We certainly have that opportunity in budget time.
Yes.
Yeah, we'll have this first round out before you get into your budget, so we'll certainly provide a report on how it went and the success rate of it.
All right, next items is appointments. We need an appointment to the Economic Development Board.
Is it someone specific appointment, Mr. Chairman?
No, anybody can make it from the floor.
So this is one of the group.
Kind of consensus. Do y'all want to hold it till the next meeting?
It would appear
I'm not
that way.
prepared to.
Yeah, it would
I
appear
haven't
that
looked
way.
at it.
That's what it sounds like.
Okay. I thought someone had been decided. I must have been mistaken.
I thought we had already approved John Snowden.
Well, he has to be nominated and voted on.
All right, then I nominate John Snowden.
All right. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Oppose? Motion carries. Next item is Planning Board. I think,
I have someone for that.
okay,
Mike Kaysen
okay.
from Knights Island.
And Bobby Bell is eligible for reappointment.
I don't know whose appointment that is.
He's an at-large.
Yeah. Well, he
For the board.
actually was my appointment initially, but he's on here as a consensus, but I don't think anybody has a problem reappointing him. So Mike Kaysen and reappoint Bobby Bell. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Board of Adjustment. Vance, that's yours as well.
I'd like to reappoint Donna McLeod.
All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next appointment is an alternate on the Albemarle Rural Transportation Advisory Committee. Vance is our voting person on that committee, and I believe the request is to put someone on who could go in the event he can't make it.
I will say this, and I'll just, for this reason, sometimes that meeting can be 3 hours away. Mr. Scanlon and I rode a lot of miles back and forth to it. They're held in the daytime, generally from, we've left the courthouse here at 8 o'clock in the morning at times. So whoever it is needs to be available some during the day. And I know that some of y'all have jobs, and it kind of would not be something you probably would like to have. I just wanted to let y'all know that up front.
And I think the reason for this too, there's been a lot of times that they didn't have enough quorums because, so by having alternates, you can almost assure that you'll have the quorums.
I can't say how many times it's been. I know the last time when we were there, that took place, and we drove
That's correct.
A 3-hour drive and then
a long ways
you come right
to
back.
do nothing but eat a sandwich and turn around and come home.
And that doesn't make you happy.
No.
All right, we need a nomination from the board.
Mr. O'Neill? Go ahead. Well,
No, I was going to say, I'll make a nomination for Chairman O'Neill if he's got the time to do it.
Hopefully, I won't need to, but in the event, yeah, I would.
I'm
I
not
would.
planning on missing it,
Yeah.
but who knows?
Okay.
Might have a wheel bearing.
If anybody else would rather do it, I'm fine with that. If not, then,
I second that nomination.
okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Lucky.
Next item is consent agenda.
Move to approve, Mr. Chairman.
I have a motion for approval.
I'll second.
Second. Further discussion? All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
All right.
Opposed? Motion carries. Commissioners report. We'll start with you, Mr. Beaumont.
Nothing to report.
Mr. Hall.
Nothing to report.
Mr. Griggs.
Nothing to report, thank you.
Mr. Idlet.
Just like to let everyone know, I hope they had a very Merry Christmas and Happy New Year, and hope their New Year turns out to be prosperous and happy. The only other thing I wanted to talk a little bit about is the airplane flying episodes 2 days before duck season.
Yes.
Had many calls and complaints from hunters and citizens alike that have hunted in the sounds and marshes of this county their whole life. I had one gentleman who manages a large hunting club over on the Knights Island side, Swan Island, told me that 2 days or 3 days before the hunting season come in, he said the population of birds in their marshes looked like the 70s. And if for those of you who were not here in the 70s or don't know, that was nice, very nice.
That was nice.
2 days before the season come in, so I have found out, Fish and Wildlife Service, it was not Mackey Island, but it was Back Bay National Wildlife Refuge, flew a plane all afternoon, one afternoon, doing surveys, bird counts, and don't know what else. Possibly could have had a warden in there with them to be doing some checking for baiting or whatever the case may be. Anyhow, needless to say, when the first day of hunting come in, what game was there was gone. Typically happens. Their protocols for flying these bird counts is at 150 feet at 90 knots. So you can imagine what that does to resting birds that are in marsh areas, and that plane flying over them and runs them off. I was told by the Fish and Wildlife people that no, it don't run them off, it relocates them. So anyhow, we just had to beg to differ on the terminology and definition between running them off and relocating them, but they were gone. There was another episode of that taking place about a week later, around the north end of Knights Island. Come to find out, that was Virginia Game and Wildlife was doing a bird count, similar as well, over their marshes that they own up there. So that was a state thing. I got in touch with Barry Knight, who's a representative state, House of Delegates in Virginia, lives there in Back Bay. Him and I talked about it some and agreed to make some phone calls and this, that, and the other. He's made some phone calls. I've made some phone calls. I've also got in touch with the North Carolina Ducks Unlimited chairman. He's a friend of mine. Talked with him. He has sent to DU National to try to get them to some type of way support a letter or something that we can send to Atlanta, to the Fish and Wildlife folks. I mean, they've got a job to do, and we all understand that. But the timing just kind of is bad. 2 days before hunting season, you do that, just come on. But so anyhow, that's where it's at now. I'm waiting to hear back from Mr. Taylor, who is the chairman of DU. I also understand that there's been folks that are going to our local game board. Tried to call Mr. Brumsey, had not been available to get in touch with him yet for whatever reason over Christmas holidays. But anyhow, I still plan on calling him. And when I get something put together that maybe has a little bit of sense and resolution to it, I will bring it forward. If I don't, well, I won't. So that's where it's at.
Thank you very much. Mr. Payment.
Nothing at this time.
I have nothing as well except wish everyone a Happy New Year and hope 2015 is a great year for everyone on the board, the staff, and their constituents. Mr. Scanlon?
Nothing tonight, thank you.
Well, with that, take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Meeting is